Namaste. Today we'll continue to read in Book 2, Canto 11, starting at the top of page 274, and we'll read to the end of the canto. I think that last week there were a couple of terms which I didn't explain. At least as I was going away, I thought of them and that I should have explained them. On page 269, near the middle, in the section about the subtle archangel race, we read that these powers, mind powers, imposing schemes of knowledge on the vast, they clamped to syllogisms of finite thought the free logic of an infinite consciousness, grammared the hidden rhythms of nature's dance, critiqued the plot of the drama of the worlds, made figure and number a key to all that is. So this is again describing the action of these powers of greater mind. Syllogisms are statements of logical argument, we can say, normally in three parts. So when things have been formulated in this way, they are supposed to be utterly convincing. Similarly, on page 273, we read these lines. This is about the next higher level of beings. In their work, a stripped imperative of conceptual phrase, architectonic and inevitable, translated the unthinkable into thought. Stripped suggests that this is a very plain statement without any ornamentation or development. It's imperative, it's absolutely convincing. It expresses in a conceptual phrase, a single phrase, a concept. But this phrase is architectonic and inevitable. I would like to say that Sri Aurobindo's paragraphs are architectonic. They are built up of one statement after another, everything connecting to what has gone before in a very firm and beautiful and satisfying form. Architectonic. So, as I said, today we should reach the end of this canto. It has several sections. Perhaps we can just run through and remind ourselves. We started with lines 1 of the canto, 1 to 65, an introductory section, which was about Asvapati's return to the higher realms of thought, which are his origin, his native home. So, just to enhance that particular section, we saw two of Huta's paintings and listened to a beautiful passage of music by Sunil. The next section tells us about a triple realm of ordered thought. And in that triple realm, there's a race of young, keen-visioned gods. They are doing some of this work of forming things in the mind world. So first there was this race of young, keen-visioned gods. And then we went a little higher and we read about a subtle archangel race. And finally, we read about the sovereign kings of thought. I'd like to just try and read a few lines about those sovereign kings of thought. Lines 495 to 499. Here, Sri Aurobindo winds up the main part of this canto by saying, "Here, the mind's wisdom stopped. It felt complete, for nothing more was left to think or know. In a spiritual zero, it sat throned and took its vast silence for the ineffable, for what cannot be expressed." Then we start with today's passage, line 499, at the top of page 274. Sri Aurobindo summing up what has gone before. This was the play of the bright gods of thought, attracting into time the timeless light, imprisoning eternity in the hours. This they have planned to snare the feet of truth in an aureate net of concept and of phrase, and keep her captive for the thinker's joy in his little world built of immortal dreams. And there she must dwell, mured in the human mind. The she is truth, mured, walled in the human mind. An empress, prisoner in her subject's house, adored and pure and still on his heart's throne. This he is the thinker. His splendid property, cherished and apart, in the wall of silence of his secret muse, immaculate in white virginity, the same forever and forever one, his worshipped, changeless goddess through all time. Or else, a faithful consort of his mind, assenting to his nature and his will. She sanctions and inspires his words and acts, prolonging their resonance through the listening ears. Companion and recorder of his march, crossing a brilliant tract of thought and life, carved out of the eternity of time. A witness of his high triumphant star, her Godhead, servitor to a crowned idea. He shall dominate by her a prostrate world. A warrant for his deeds and his beliefs. She attests his right divine to lead and rule. Or, as a lover clasps his one beloved, Godhead of his life's worship and desire, icon of his heart's sole idolatry, she now is his and must live for him alone. She has invaded him with her sudden bliss, an exhaustless marvel in his happy grasp, an allurement, a caught, ravishing miracle. Her now he claims, after long, rapt pursuit, the one joy of his body and his soul. Inescapable is her divine appeal. Her immense possession, an undying thrill, an intoxication and an ecstasy. The passion of her self-revealing moods, a heavenly glory and variety, makes ever new her body to his eyes, or else repeats the first enchantment's touch. The luminous rapture of her mystic breasts and beautiful vibrant limbs, a living field of throbbing new discovery without end. A new beginning flowers in word and laugh. A new charm brings back the old extreme delight. He is lost in her. She is his heaven here. Truth smiled upon the gracious golden game. Out of her hushed eternal spaces leaned the great and boundless goddess, fain to yield the sunlit sweetness of her secrecies. Incarnating her beauty in his clasp, she gave for a brief kiss her immortal lips, and drew to her bosom one glorified mortal head. She made earth her home, for whom heaven was too small. In a human breast, her occult presence lived. He carved from his own self his figure of her. She shaped her body to a mind's embrace. Into thought's narrow limits she has come. Her greatness she has suffered to be pressed into the little cabin of the idea, the closed room of a lonely thinker's grasp. She has lowered her heights to the stature of our souls, and dazzled our lids with her celestial gaze. Thus, each is satisfied with his high gain, and thinks himself beyond mortality blessed, a king of truth upon his separate throne. To her possessor in the field of time, a single splendor caught from her glory seems the one true light, her beauty's glowing whole. But thought nor word, excuse me. But thought nor word can seize eternal truth. The whole world lives in a lonely ray of her sun. In our thinking's close and narrow lamplit house, the vanity of our shut mortal mind dreams that the chains of thought have made her ours, but only we play with our own brilliant bonds. Tying her down, it is ourselves we tie. In our hypnosis, by one luminous point, we see not what small figure of her we hold. We feel not her inspiring boundlessness. We share not her immortal liberty. Thus is it even with the seer and sage, for still the human limits the divine. Out of our thoughts we must leap up to sight, breathe her divine illimitable air, her simple vast supremacy confess, and dare to surrender to her absolute. Then the unmanifest reflects his form in the still mind as in a living glass. The timeless ray descends into our hearts, and we are wrapped into eternity. For truth is wider, greater than her forms. 1,000 icons they have made of her, and find her in the idols they adore. But she remains herself and infinite. I think of this last section, if I would like to put a heading to it, I would call it Snaring the Feet of Truth. That's what the thinker aspires to do. And it's so beautiful the way that the poet has described this in terms of a kind of love affair between the thinker and the goddess of truth. And she accepts this game. She allows him to seize as much of her as he can. But she will always remain, finally, herself and infinite. This is quite beyond the realm of thought. So I'll go back to the top of page 274 and read this passage again, and a few unfamiliar words I will explain as I go along. So what we've been reading about in the previous sections has been the play of the bright gods of thought. And their task is to attract into time, into human time, the timeless light, the light that, the transcendent light from above the manifestation. They are trying, to a certain extent, they're allowed to succeed. They're trying to imprison eternity in the hours. And what they're aspiring to do is to snare the feet of truth, as if she's an animal to be caught in a trap. No. They want to catch hold of her in a golden net, an aureate net of thought and language, of concept and of phrase, formulation. Each thinker wants to keep the truth for himself. He wants to keep the goddess of truth, the truth he adores, in his own little world built of immortal dreams. There she must dwell mured in the human mind. It means immured, walled up within the limits of the thinker's mind. And there she's like an empress who has been kept prisoner in the house of her subject. Thought, mind, is actually her subject. She is the empress who rules all. But there she is, adored. He worships her. There she is, pure and still, unmoving on the throne of his heart. He considers her his property, his splendid property, cherished, valued, and protected. Apart in the wall of silence of his secret muse, he meditates on her. She's immaculate, perfect, stainless in her white virginity, the same forever and forever one, his worshipped, changeless goddess through all time. That's how he wishes her to be. Or else he perceives her as a kind of partner, a faithful consort of his mind, assenting to, agreeing to his nature and his will, sanctioning, saying yes to his words and acts, and inspiring them, and through her power prolonging their resonance through the listening ears. When he speaks out his truth, she gives the words power. He considers her as a companion and a recorder of his march, almost a kind of secretary, noting down what the thoughts that he develops. Crossing a brilliant tract of thought and life, carved out of the eternity of time. It's just one section of the immense infinite universe. He sees her as a witness of his great achievements, his high, triumphant star. And he thinks of her divinity serving this particular idea, a crowned idea. And by that crowned idea, through his particular truth, he will be able to dominate a world which bows down to him. His truth is a warrant, an authentication for his deeds and his beliefs. That warrant which she gives is the authority for his divine right to lead and rule. Or a different kind of relationship, slightly different. Or as a lover clasps his one beloved, Godhead of his life's worship and desire, icon of his heart's sole idolatry. She now is his and must live for him alone. Quite possessive. She has invaded him with her sudden bliss. She's given him this wonderful experience, and he experiences her as an inexhaustible marvel in his happy grasp. He can hold on to her. She's an allurement, an endless attraction, and at the same time a ravishing miracle that he has caught hold of her. And he's claiming her, he's claiming possession of her after long, rapt pursuit. He has been searching for her, trying to reach her and grasp her for a very long time. Now he claims her as the one joy of his body and his soul. Her divine appeal is inescapable. To him, this fact that he can possess this wonderful marvel is an undying thrill, an intoxication and an ecstasy. The passion of her self-revealing moods, she doesn't remain always the same. The truth goddess displays a heavenly glory and variety. So this body of the truth which he's holding on to, it seems always new and fresh to him, or repeats the enchantment of the first contact. The luminous rapture of her mystic breasts and beautiful vibrant limbs are a living field for him of throbbing new discovery without end, always fresh and new. A new beginning flowers in word and laugh. A new charm brings back the old extreme delight. He is lost in her. She is his heaven here. Truth smiled upon the gracious golden game. She accepts all this. She sees it as a game, a gracious golden game. She pretends to give in to him, to submit to him. Out of her hushed, eternal spaces leaned this great and boundless goddess, feigned to yield, pretended to yield the sunlit sweetness of her secrecies. She does this for him as part of her game, incarnating her beauty in his clasp. She gave for a brief kiss her immortal lips and drew to her bosom one glorified mortal head. She made earth her home, for whom heaven was too small. She is so vast, but she compresses herself down to his clasp. She allows her occult presence to live in a human breast. And he, the thinker, the worshipper, the truth worshipper, carved from his own self his figure of her, his image of her. And she accepts this too. She shaped her body to a mind's embrace. In this way, the gracious truth goddess has come into thought's narrow limits. She has allowed her greatness to be pressed, to be compressed into the little cabin of the idea, tiny little thinker's cell, the closed room of a lonely thinker's grasp. And she hasn't only done this for one person, she's done this for many, many truth lovers. She has lowered her heights to the stature of our souls and dazzled our lids with her celestial gaze, as if she's gazing into our eyes and sharing a great secret. So in this way, each thinker, each truth worshipper is satisfied with his high game and thinks himself beyond mortality blessed, the most blessed of all men, a king of truth upon his separate throne. Immediately it makes him big. To her possessor in the field of time, a single splendor caught from her glory seems the one true light, her beauty's glowing whole. This is why we even quarrel about the value of our truths. Each of us thinks that a single splendor, the single splendor which she has granted to us, is the one true light and expresses the whole of her beauty. But she is far beyond that. But thought nor word can seize eternal truth. The whole world lives in a lonely ray of her sun. King Asvapati worships the Sun of Truth. In our thinking's close and narrow, lamplit house, our restricted consciousness, the vanity of our shut mortal mind dreams that the chains of thought have made her ours, and that we have caught hold of her and grasped her and can keep her with us. But we are only playing with our own brilliant bonds, the bonds we have tied ourselves up in, the bonds of thought. Tying her down, it is ourselves we tie. We are hypnotized by just one luminous point of her vast light. We don't realize what a tiny figure of her we are holding on to. We don't feel her inspiring boundlessness, her limitlessness, her infinity. So we don't share her immortal liberty. And this is true even with the wisest, with the seer and the sage. For still, the human limits the divine. Out of our thoughts, we must leap up to sight. At the beginning, we had this discussion about the thought and vision. Here, in this case, when it is sight, it's obviously far beyond the limits of thought. Out of our thoughts, we must leap up to sight. Breathe her divine, illimitable air. Her simple, vast supremacy confess. Dare to surrender to her absolute. If we can do that, for anyone who can do that, then the unmanifest reflects his form in the still mind as in a living glass, a living mirror. Then the timeless ray descends into our hearts, and we are wrapped into eternity. For truth is wider, greater than her forms. 1,000 icons they have made of her. They, all the thinkers, all of us, and find in her, they do find in her the idols that they adore. But she remains herself and infinite, far beyond our grasp. It is listening ears. It suggests that the truth lover is sharing his gospel, and by her sanction whatever he has to say, his gospel, gains resonance. Those who listen to him, expounding his thoughts and his understanding. She sanctions and inspires his words and his actions, prolonging their resonance. She gives greater duration and point and strength to his words and his acts, prolonging their resonance through the listening ears, whoever happens to be listening to him. At least that is my understanding of this line. So we'll stop there for today. Thanks to Sri Aurobindo.